Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for plucky misfits and problem solvers. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton. And over the last few days, I have been watching coverage of campus protests about Israel and Gaza and been increasingly gobsmacked. Campus protests have become a major flashpoint in not just the culture war, but inside of the Democratic Party and progressive circles, and the whole thing is heating up. On April 17th, Columbia students pitched more than 50 tents on the lawn of their campus to establish a liberated zone on behalf of the Gazan people. Although that zone did not stay up for long, university officials asserted that a physical zone that large was too disruptive to campus life, and not to mention was creating an environment of harassment and intimidation for students, particularly Jewish students. Police arrived shortly thereafter at the administration's behest, removed over 100 protesters, and tied up their hands with zip ties. Some of those students were suspended or removed from student housing. Meanwhile, Jews on university campuses report rising anti-Semitism. They report targeted harassment and an increasing concern that they are not physically safe attending classes, which prompted Columbia University to cancel in-person classes for the rest of the semester. Until the end of term, classes on that established prestigious campus will be remote, like we are back in the pandemic. Meanwhile, down here in Texas, students at the University of Texas, Austin, started to rev up similar pro-Gaza, anti-Israel protests and create their own liberated zone or something akin to it, but the governor sent in troops on horseback to break it up. So what's happening here, gang? What is going on American college campuses? Is there something unique occurring with the current anti-Israel, pro-Gaza protests? And what is the ramifications of them, not just politically, but in terms of our culture and higher education? To answer that broad and long-winded question, I am going to blow the conch shell and summon my friends in the world's smartest podcast network. Let's go!
You're listening to the world's smartest podcast network.
Once more, the world's smartest podcast network convenes to put some good ideas in your brain. And the people joining today include well, hold on. We're going to be talking about things that are related to academics and culture wars on campuses. So, noting that we are joined today by the inimitable Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy. They are the professor who's too cool for school, literally left school. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Always happy to come back and talk about the place that I left on purpose in the least biased way possible.
We are also joined by Michael Ira Kaplan, who is a one-man Animal House in double secret probation in the world of academia. He is the fun guy in a 1980s John Belushi romp. Hello, Kaplan.
Hello, I love that. Was the pithiest of introductions. Thank you so much. Great to.
Thank you.
I have to live up to that now.
All three of us, because we love you, are doing this by comedian standards very early in the morning. I'm not going to tell you what time it is because everybody that has a real job will get mad at me when I tell you what time it is.
They're already on their first break of the day, but yes.
Yeah. You, like my Uncle Dan, who's a farmer, is having lunch right now. But but for us,
very early.
This is very early. So this is heroic levels of pith. And I am, of course, Andrew Heaton, who has no great academic credentials, but I do own a lot of elbow patches. So I feel like maybe at some point I'll become an adjunct.
You have a pipe too, right?
I think I say this every time, Heaton, but spiritually you are an academic.
Yeah.
In a way that I could never hope to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I am the headmaster of the Political Orphanage.
That's right.
And we've convened to talk about all of the stuff going on at university campuses, specifically related to the anti-Israel and pro-Gaza and that whole morass of events going on. And I am wanting you all... Oh, I should note, Turner Sparks, who normally joins us, is dead.
I think
or
he's
ill,
dead.
or
he's protesting.
Is he dead?
I think he's at Columbia University right now with a
That's right.
keffiyeh
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And he's
Turner has seen the light.
Repeating chants right now. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to sitcom this where we like drop a character and just never mention it again forever, and everybody's like, "Wait, wasn't there a fourth guy? What happened to him?" Turner is feeling slightly under the weather, or alternately lied because he didn't want to wake up this early. One of those one of those two things is happening, but we hope he will join us later in the broadcast. So who wants to field what's been going on exactly? Who can I kick this to explain the basics of the situation? Cap?
Well, can I just say, this is also a follow-up. We had a conversation months ago,
about a year ago,
about the idea when there was these first started, and there were prominent Jewish people not giving their money to universities because of this. And I want to say, at least we figured out that the Jews, we don't have that much money because we don't make a difference because this is still going on. We didn't solve the problem by just threatening to stop paying for things. So we're still
glad
here. It's worse than ever.
That mask has finally been pulled off, and we know that it's
run
it's
the
not
world.
easy. I do think you're good to kick it off, Kaplan, because I feel like a lot of the information I'm getting, certainly the more egregious examples of weird protest tactics that are disseminated on Twitter, I do get from you. So I feel like you're watching this more closely than I am. So can you let's say theoretically, there are listeners of my program that just tune in for the zoning.
Yeah.
That's it. They're zoning hawks, and they don't know anything about what's going on American college campuses related to Gaza or Israel. What would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them, so it's been crazy since literally the moment when October 7th happened, and 1,200, 1,400 Israelis were massacred and raped and murdered, and a war began. From that moment, the college left seemed to be on the side of the massacring. That's how it started. But, that's to be expected, a little bit as we talked about. But something happened. I don't know what happened about a few weeks ago, but it really amped up where all the college kids decided that they needed to just decide to sleep in tents on their campuses. They decided they're done partying, they're done hooking up, they're done doing things that I thought you did in college, having a good time. And this was how they're going to have a good time. And they've been sleeping. It started at Columbia University, to be specific, I believe, is where that's where I really noticed it. And they just were not leaving until they say their universities are complicit in the genocide, which I think my understanding.
When I think of major players in the Middle East, immediately what springs to my mind is Columbia University.
Yes.
I'm like, God, if Columbia would just quit sitting on its goddamn hands,
they could solve this
we'd
problem
probably
tomorrow.
have a 2-state, we'd have a 3-state solution. We'd let the Bedouins have something too, but they're holding back.
Yeah. Well,
nail on the head.
No. So and I think, and Andrea can maybe address this, but I think what happened was the Columbia kids were getting so much positive feedback from their little circles that all the other universities said, wait a second, we got to get involved. So now it started NYU, and now I'm seeing it all. I saw in UT Austin. I'm seeing it all around the country where college kids are just taking over their universities' public spaces and saying, this is our free speech right to just live here now and just, all dressed like we're part of Hamas and make chants that repeat over and over again, these robotic chants that we are subservient to the cause. So anyway.
Can I comment on the free speech thing real quick?
Yes.
I am not a free speech attorney, but I am friendly with Greg Lukianoff, who's the head of FIRE, which is the main, the ACLU equivalent for speech on campuses. He's been on the show a couple of times, and I follow that to some extent. Free speech actually does have law involved in it. You are allowed to express opinions. That is protected. What you can't do is form a ring of people locking arms to stop students from entering a building. That's not speech. That's stopping somebody else from accessing education. And on the flip side, being anti-Semitic is protected speech. That is to say, if you have an odious opinion or a horrible opinion, if you are expressing that opinion on a college campus, you are allowed to do so. The speech guidelines which exist for public universities and are typically followed for private universities are, this cannot rise to the level of a imminent threat of violence, nor can it be a specific harassment of an individual. So theoretically, somebody could come out and say, the Jews control the gravel industry. We all know it. I said it. Whatever the thing is, right? But they couldn't go, Kaplan's a Jew, go get him. They couldn't do that, right?
Right.
And I mention this because I see a lot of failure to understand like kind of basic speech law across the political spectrum, where whenever I see stuff coming out of Columbia or NYU and they've like decided that they are allowed to spray paint Jews in the face or whatever dumbass thing they're doing this week, and they're like, but it's free speech. And it's like, no, free speech doesn't mean if the opinion in your heart burns bright with passion, you can do whatever you want. That's not what it fucking means. I don't know. Maybe you could go to some sort of institution that teaches things to learn this. But on the flip side, like, and I don't know the details of the UT situation that you just mentioned, Kaplan. But what I'm seeing in terms of the reporting, and I'm seeing in terms of the stories are, it very much looks like Governor Greg Abbott went, they're anti-Semitic. Send in the literal cavalry and just send in a bunch of cops.
They handle it differently down there than they do up
to
here.
Like break it up. And I'm like, well, that also, if they are peaceably protesting and they're on public property, like you're not allowed to like send in guys with batons on horseback to whack them in the head. Like there's a lot of misunderstanding of how speech on campuses works in the country at the moment from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, well, and I think first of all, they don't know, and just to correct the record, they don't say anything about Jews. They say Zionists. That's the code word. We use the word Zionist now. So, but they do harass people who are Jewish, calling them Zionists, and that's where I think you're talking about, like students. There's a lot of examples of students that, and I don't know about UT, but at Columbia specifically, who have been like harassed to professors because they are quote Zionists. So I think that's where it crosses over the line you're mentioning.
I mean, and I think there are, four big themes, even just as we're talking about this, that come up out of this kind of microcosm that I think are interesting, and I think are part of the reason that our group chat has been very busy, and one of the reasons we wanted to convene a roundtable, right? So one is, it does follow up on the conversation we had a few months ago about free speech on campus. And in particular, back then, it was the simple days of, the students who were Jewish were getting, spray paint on their doors, or there was kind of some yelling, but it wasn't like organized like this. So one, it kind of goes back to this. You're being anti-Semitic. Are you being anti-Semitic? Is that free speech? Everything that Heaton just talked about. Another theme is, are college students just going to be college students? And this, I wasn't around during Vietnam. Heaton, I feel like you would know a lot about the Vietnam era.
I was around back then.
You would know.
Yeah, I actually briefly dated Tipper Gore back before she was Tipper Gore. I was around back then. Yeah.
So there's sort of like, are college students, is this just another round of college students being college students? Are we gearing up for, the cavalry is coming in? Are we gearing up for a Kent State? Is this some kind of like young people versus old? Am I out of touch really is sort of where I'm landing with this. The third piece of this is, what's the actual problem? And Heaton, you hit on this, which is, yes, there's anti-Semitism, but there's also, and I think that's the main problem, but there's also just, you're disrupting university life. And so it's one thing to have protests in city streets, and I think it's another to have protests on a college campus. And notably, the NYU protests, I wandered around there yesterday, were not in Washington Square Park. They were on a plaza that was very specifically belongs to NYU as opposed to a public place. So you're not, in Union Square. You're in an area where other people are trying to learn and work. And I have colleagues who are saying, look, my offices are above these protests. I'm not able to get anything done. Students are not able to go to school. So there's another piece of this where it's like, could we intervene as colleges because we're not allowed to carry out our business of what we're supposed to offer, which is this. And then there's a fourth theme that I think is the big one, which is it's final exam season. This is a number one way for students to not take final exams is to roil up the school. Yeah. It's the most stressful time of the year. We're about to hit summer. I would start a protest.
Wait, what do you mean they don't have to take the
this
finals?
This is just a convenient topic.
Why don't they have to take, because the teachers won't make them take the finals if they're at the protests? Is that what?
Plausibly, or the school already. You see Columbia going to hybrid / remote.
Columbia, right?
Yeah. You could easily pull something like during the pandemic where it ultimately, most universities, in most universities, in my experience, it's up to the professors. Unless you're part of a very strict curriculum, you can do whatever you want. Any semester, I could have said, final exam is over. 1 year during the pandemic, my co-instructor and I discussed making the final exam optional. You can do whatever you want. So you could completely see professors being like, it's too disruptive. Semester's over. This far into it. There are also many professors, I think we were talking about this right before we started recording, who are on the side of the protesters. Right, that's what I was going to say.
The professors have been teaching, like, let's be honest, the social justice. They're all, most of them are anti-Israel. They're probably applauding their kids for doing this. They're probably giving them
and many
positive
professors
grades for
too
doing
have
this.
either joined the protests or staged their own walkout. And a loose comparison I have is a year or two ago, the graduate students at NYU were protesting, and it was very disruptive as well because they weren't coming. The TAs weren't coming to class or grading papers or teaching their discussion sections or anything like that. And many professors were very sympathetic to that as well and considered suspending their own classes in the name of support of them. So the whole thing could fall. And then even if you're in a class that's not affected, you could say, well, the rest of the university is in disarray. How can I be expected to study? I think it's a complete non-accident.
Yeah. Well, and we've got 4 themes and a caveat that I will add in, which I'm going to push this to the back of the episode because I want to get into the campus stuff first. But we've been talking about anti-Semitism. We should say there are legitimate problems you can have with the Netanyahu regime. That does not make you anti-Semitic. You should not automatically be dismissed for having problems with the Netanyahu regime as an anti-Semite, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll get into a little bit more of that nuanced on the back end of the program. We're going to focus on the campus end up top. I will kick it off by saying, as somebody that dated Tipper Gore back during the Vietnam era and born in the
1950s. Tipper Gore is your example of, when I think of like the hippies from the Vietnam era, that's not the number one.
Wait. So the other day I did a video for Reason on Greenflation, and somebody, I don't know, some British person was like, this wanker should like talk to Liz Truss. She'd love everything he says. And so I tweeted back at him. I was like, we actually dated briefly in the 90s, all caps. It did not end well. And I'm like, what are you going to do with that guy on Twitter? Yeah. Like now you have to think about, was I being serious or not?
Yeah. Tipper Gore is the Liz Truss of America.
As a possible immortal who was around in the campus environment in the 60s and 70s, I would like to say I have consistently been anti-teenager. I've been anti-teenager for several decades now. And my take on college protests in general, which have come to a head on Columbia and NYU most recently with Gaza and Israel, but in general, this is my take. I think that college is the first time in your life where you are truly exposed to righteous indignation, and you get to engage in righteous indignation, which is an incredible, heady, energizing, chemically addictive feeling that has lots of fun chemicals to it, like adrenaline. Also sex, by the way. A lot of sex in the background from those things. I think it's a very, very heady feeling that people are engaging in, and you're kind of an adult, so you get to do it in a way that's not just, putting sticky notes on lockers in high school, but it feels as if you're participating in the general zeitgeist and so on and so forth. I think that 9 out of 10 college protests would, if the protest was going to happen and then the whole situation resolved, they'd find a new thing to be mad at and a new thing to protest, because the protest is fun. So that's my takeaways. I think the urge to protest precedes the alleged instigating factor of the protest. That is my read on it, to the point where when I watch Les Mis, there's a part of me that's like, I don't know, maybe the king should grape shot all those college students on there's a part of me, right? So right. I should say I am instinctively dismissive of college protests, because I think that they are a social phenomenon rather than a political phenomenon. I think the social phenomenon is, I want to feel kind of self-righteous. I want to join my friends. I also want to expurgate the guilt I feel as a very privileged person at a top tier university. And I'm going to expurgate those feelings by living in a tent for a week and cosplaying as a poor person. And I'm going to invite some suffering onto my life in order to show that I actually do have grit. I am not merely a limp-wristed college student. Hopefully I'll get arrested. It'll be in a very, very easy clinical way that will not actually cause any long-term detriment to me, but I can hang it around my neck for the rest of my life. That I got arrested when I was in college. That's how much I think it's a social phenomenon for 90% of the people. And then I'll add, I'm also not, one of the reasons that I say this is much of the time I am unclear on what the actionable steps are. So I went to a college protest when I was in college, when I was far less cynical than I am right now.
What were you protesting?
It was Rwanda.
Oh,
this was when This is when I pretended to be in my 20s and went back to the University of Oklahoma in the early aughts.
Okay.
There was a protest to Rwanda, and I'll say I was less cynical and I was a lot more politically open and a lot more ideologically malleable at that time than I am now. So this is kind of peak open-minded Heaton, and we were protesting Rwanda. And I remembered wandering around, and I kept grabbing people, going, "Hey, can you clarify what are we protesting?" And they'd be like, "Rwanda, the Rwanda genocide." I'd be like, "No, I get that. I'm very against that, but who are we? Are we trying to get are we hoping the Rwandan government is watching the University of Oklahoma and that they're gonna this will somehow, or are we trying to get the American military to intervene?" And no one really knew, and I was like, "Oh, this is just kind of this is a feelings exercise. This is not anything actionable." And I've been very skeptical ever since then and have only gained in skepticism watching university campuses.
I mean, there's a broader conversation too, Heaton, where it's, college students protesting on college campuses versus the merits and power of protests writ large. And there is evidence out there to suggest that some protests have been effective. It's very, very difficult to study empirically because you have a protest and then something happens. Did it happen because of the protest? Would it have happened in the absence of the protest? Does the protest need to be a certain number of people? Does it need to have a certain set of actionable steps, like withdraw our troops or do this other thing? Put George Floyd's killers in jail, or whatever it is that that particular protest wants. But I do think that college protests in particular, I've been trying, as you were describing it, I was trying to muster the least cynical thing I can say, and I want to say that I have a very negative feeling about most college students because having taught in higher education for many years, unfortunately, the students I tend to hear from are the ones who are aggrieved or angry or want to complain about something. Those are the voices that I hear. So I have a biased sample of college students. And my best effort at mustering something very, very genuine, because I want to not just be irritated by these protests. And so the best I can offer is I do think that there are people in these protests, and college students in particular, and in regular protests, who genuinely care about the issues that they're protesting.
Sure, yes.
A lot of the time, there is no obvious thing that we can do. We're sitting and we're watching the news and we're feeling helpless, and I hate that all these innocent people are being killed, or I hate that this is happening. I want to do something. Posting on social media is not going to scratch that itch. It's not going to make me feel like I'm making a difference. And I think young people, and I did not participate in any protests in college. I don't think I've ever participated in a protest ever because loud groups of screaming makes me nervous. But I don't even like parades. I don't. But we're all too happy. No. Sports makes me nervous, right? Because everyone's yelling.
I totally get it. I don't know why I'm coming with the French Revolution today, but I remember when I went to a University of Oklahoma game before I have Forswear football games, just everybody's cheering and screaming, and I was like, there's some part of me that got killed by a mob in a past life. There's some part of me, my head was on a pike somewhere.
Yeah.
And these protests are sports.
I was one of the first people killed in the what is it? The gladiators. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm a history buff.
What were you saying, Kaplan?
Well, I was saying that's what this is, though. This is like a sport event for people who don't go to sports events. They're actually at universities and aren't big sports programs, most of them, and this is their thing. They're part of the fan cheering section. They have their own chants. It's all the same psychology.
Yeah.
It's their team versus the other team. They hate the other team,
I do think there's a lot of that teamsy element to it for sure.
Yes.
Andrea, to your point, I think that's a fair point. I think that the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King Jr., I think, did a very good job of letting Black people know how much power and how much influence they had, knowing that they weren't isolated aggregate individuals that were angry about unjust Jim Crow laws and segregation, but rather were part of a collective bloc that had some level of influence. There's a good argument, and I think I would agree with it, that was an efficacious protest. I guess the bit that irritates me is there's a broader trend that I see in our society of I did it because I said something, therefore I'm a good person.
Yeah.
So I am, the older I get, I am more and more emphatically of the position that if you really want to see what people care about, look at their checkbook. That's it. That's what people care about. If you want to see what people actually care about, look what they spend money on. And I find that weirdly enough, people really, really enjoy telling you what they care about verbally when it doesn't cost them anything. And I donate money to charity every year, not a crazy amount, but a surprisingly a large amount for a semi-failed comedian such as myself, because I feel that it is incumbent.
Semi-succeeded comedian.
You're right. By definition, if I'm semi-failed, I'm also semi-successful. So let's look at it.
To charity, folks.
Yeah, let's what 1/3 comedian or whatever I am. So I get very irritated when it's like, yeah, like I'll go volunteer someplace, less these days, but I'll donate money, and then I have people that are like, well, I tweet a lot, or I relentlessly bring up politics at dinner table conversations, and I'm like, yeah, I don't actually think you care that much about this stuff because you're not doing anything. So to me, this resonates. Although I will, I guess, undercut my own argument in that the college students that are there presumably do not have, not many of them have full-time incomes that they could dedicate to causes. So I guess there is, to their credit, there's this sort of energy that they want to direct someplace. There's not financial resources. It's not like you can go from Colombia, hop the direct flight to Gaza and start doing humanitarian aid relief. So maybe I'm being overly critical.
I would say two things. One is I think this gets to, and I'd like to invite Kaplan to describe this, but the actual reason, the claimed reason for the protests and what the students actually want the universities to do, which is adjust how they spend their money. But as you're describing this, Heaton, it occurs to me, if they don't support what the universities are spending their money on, they could withdraw their tuition from Columbia and thereby stop supporting the Israeli government.
I was going to say
they could divest themselves. They could divest their own tuition. Yeah. Interesting proposal. That, you know what? I take back everything I just goddamn said. Those sniveling college students should do exactly that, but they won't. They won't, because at the end of the day, they do want that degree.
They want to get the job one day because they went to Columbia, which is Ivy League school.
And they get to outrank everybody else in America for the rest of their lives because of a 4-year period between ages 17 and 22. Good deal. So they're not going to rock that boat.
What you said, though, I just was thinking of, this is from a protest a few months ago, but I think it's pertinent to what you were just saying, because I was in a coffee shop in Brooklyn a few months ago, and I overheard this conversation, and the barista says to someone, she's like, and I swear this is exactly what she said. She said, I was going to go to this queer comedy show tonight, but I just can't laugh in a time like this. And I was thinking, like, what happened? Like, in my mind, I was like, did like somebody die in her family or something? And then I heard her go without missing a beat, if he could immolate himself for the cause, and I'm just sitting there on TikTok watching the news all day, I have to be involved. And I realized she was talking about that. Remember a few months ago when that American lit himself on fire at one of these protests?
Yeah, there was like a guy in the army or something
who was
lit
a little
himself
bit
on fire.
mentally disturbed. But to her, he was a hero because she's sitting there. She said, I'm just watching TikTok, which, by the way, I saw a stat the other day that TikTok is 52 pro-Hamas videos for 1 pro-Israel. And she's sitting there watching, and she felt like terrible about this. I'm just watching the news. This guy's burning himself on fire. I'm going to go to the protest now. And I think that is the mentality of a lot of these kids. They feel guilty because in their minds, this is just like the Black Lives Matter movement or any other important moment. And they have to be involved in some way. They can't just watch it on their phone. I was sorry.
I was
gonna say, and I think it's having a sort of effect because if you look at the polls, most Americans still support Israel, but Biden is slowly like cracking on his support because the young people are seen as his base and important, and he wants to please them. So I think it's working.
To put in a little bit of a political spin there, young people aren't as base because they don't vote in appreciable numbers.
That's what I wish someone would tell them, but yeah.
while yes, the election is apt to be a squeaker, as all national elections are now for the office of the president, the likelihood that college students or college-age students will make the difference, even in a swing state, is very minimal. I think the thing that Biden is worried about is Michigan has a very large Muslim population and Arab population and Dearborn and other places, and it is a swing state. That is what he is thinking about.
It's about 2% of their population. And
how do I like? I think he's
Arab lover Trump instead.
Yeah. I think he's a lot more worried about that than he is college students. And plus, like, college students might vote for Jill Stein or something, but they're not. They're not going to go vote for Trump, and so yeah.
I mean, there is a movement, and I don't know how appreciable it is, of Jewish voters towards Trump. Am I right about that? Cap, speak up on behalf of all Jewish voters. I'll speak on
the Jews.
Voters.
The Jews are going to vote. Yeah. If they're going to still vote for the same Jew. There's different types of Jews. The more religious Jews do like Trump, and the really, really, there's like a certain sect of Jews who are super, like Israel's like super the most important issue. They might consider Trump or might have already be Republicans. But the majority of Jews, the secular Jews that's 70% are going to vote for Biden. I do think it's a long-term issue. Like, not to get, this is not really the topic of the show, but I do think long-term, I could see the Republicans making headway here, because I've seen, like, after October 7th, the amount of people I know who are like in that age group of like 35 to 50, like probably married, starting families, young Jewish family types who I've never spoken about Israel before. The amount of people posting stuff nonstop daily about the hostages. So I do think there's been an awakening amongst, and now it's not, I don't know how many people this is, but among Jewish people. And I don't think any of them, or most of them, would ever consider voting for Trump. But I do think down the road, if there was a sane Republican, and you go, especially like, you know, like there's this guy, Republican Michael Lawler in Westchester, who's like very like sane, and he's been very pro-Israel, and guys like that, or people like that, especially when they're running in districts like, you know, Jamal Bowman, that squad member who's like super anti-Israel, like that's a Democrat who Jews are going to vote for the Republican in that case, or they're going to vote for the other Democrat in the primary. Like, so yeah, I do think it's going to make a difference on more local issues, and eventually could be national, but not in this election.
I think that's something that might have very long-term effects on. Like when you look at, say, like the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that is a major inflection point in the demographic voting patterns of the American people. So Barry Goldwater, extremely ideologically oriented Republican senator from Arizona, who had voted for the two previous Civil Rights Act and himself was not a bigot, but he did have an ideological problem with 2 of the 9 provisions of that Civil Rights Act. And he said, like, I'll vote for 7 of these 9, but these 2 here, I'm afraid that's going to be an overstep of federal government in dictating to private business what they can. I don't remember the exact things.
Right, the libertarian
I think
part
he
of
was
him
probably very, I think he was very much doing the libertarian laser focus thing. While I'm going to give him a moral pass on that decision, as I don't think he was a bigot, the effect of that I don't think he remotely considered was, as the Republican forebear, as the Republican presidential candidate in that election cycle, the bigots who were actual bigots that existed in the South and other places in the country went, well, I'm voting for the guy that voted against the Civil Rights Act. And so he would both get the principled libertarian sorts and the bigot sorts. And you, at that point, see a major turn with African-American voters moving forward, where previously most black people voted Republican because Republican was the party of Lincoln. And also the Democrats were demonstrably the Jim Crow South Democrat. I mean, in the South, the Bourbon Democrats was the Jim Crow party. The Republican Party was the liberal party, or however you want to define it, the anti-racist party. That began a major shift, and you began to see these patterns of like, my dad voted for every Republican, even against FDR, but I can't, in good conscience, vote for somebody that voted against the Civil Rights Act. I think one of the things that the Democratic Party ought to be worried about moving forward is there's a kind of complacence with the Democratic Party of, well, we're the not bigoted party, therefore all minorities are going to vote for us forever, right? And I'm like, first of all, I categorically reject this idea that there's some sort of essentialist spiritual soul to political parties. Their shopping carts, their grab bags, the policy things in them swap and change regularly. So like that will happen. But I could see something like this happening, Cap, where maybe a lot of the hitherto support for academia that the Jewish culture has, being a culture that very much is associated with education, where that becomes a little bit more skeptical. We're even looking at the Democratic Party and going, oh, this is not quite as lockstep as I thought it was. Maybe I'm going to vote more independent or even potentially Republican.
I personally feel like I'm more, even with the things that I'm annoyed that Biden's done lately, I'm more pro him than ever before, because I think it's so important. I'm looking at it from like a long-term perspective. That, like,
really?
That if Biden loses this election because of Israel, that could change the whole Democratic Party, and I don't want it to be. But I will say one thing I was thinking about when you were saying that's interesting also to note is that the Arab American vote was always Republican until George Bush invaded Iraq, I think, or until, So, and then it switched to a Democrat vote. And which makes sense because that community is more socially conservative. You know, there's not like a lot of ties to there's no reason why it would be a Democrat other than the idea that, it's a minority, you know? So it could easily, they could become a Republican.
You find people that flee authoritarian regimes tend to be really, really worried of anything that strikes them as authoritarian. So they like you see this phenomenon with Cubans in Florida, where somebody will be like, Democrats or socialists, one will be like, that's all I need to know. Like that's it.
Yeah.
They're gonna vote Republican forever. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody's fleeing the Lebanese regime and is like, who talks about freedom the most? And they're like, well, the Republicans rhetorically, and they're like, that's all I need to know.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like a lot of these Venezuelans, not to go way off the topic, but like people assume they're all gonna be Democratic voters for life, and they based on what you're saying, they might not be. So exactly.
Well, and I'm really going to overgeneralize there, where it's often the case as well that the folks who do migrate to the United States, who then become second, third, fourth generation, often there are these enclaves where they're much more traditional and conservative socially than even say, so for example, families that have come from South Korea come here and are much more Christian and conservative and traditional than most families in South Korea. You kind of hang on to your belief system and your religion and things like that from home in a way that's actually more fervent. And it's not true for every group, but that social traditionalism can also play into Republican.
And there is, last thing I'll say is like, there is like a cultural stand to all this. So like Jews culturally have always been felt home at the Democratic Party, because like the Republican Party is the party of the country clubs that would exclude us kind of thing. Like we don't want to.
Right.
But like, yeah, if change, I think it's been a bit of awakening when all these people have their kids at colleges and they're seeing this, like, it's like, wait a second, I was on your side on everything. Like we're the ones marching. We're in the liberal cause on every cause. Not me personally, but a lot. And you don't have our backs here. What are you yelling about? You don't know anything. And it's like kind of seeing like you don't know anything about this issue, and it's kind of unfolding. And if they see their kids in colleges under threat, you're right. They might think like, maybe I don't belong here anymore. And I don't know, unless there's a third party you're going to get for us, we might have to switch sides.
There's plenty of third parties I could recommend to you. I do want to bring this up then. We've kind of, we have been talking about the stuff going on campuses, largely as if everybody already knows it. So I want to clarify this too. We're not talking about protesting Israeli policy, which I think is legitimate both from a legal perspective and an ethical perspective. So like, if we can talk about this in a minute of like, concerns that Israel's making a land grab or the amount of collateral damage is too high, that very legitimate, ethically, rationally, legally. The bit that we're talking about in terms of the WTF question mark going on is there was a video that went viral of Colombia of chanting back and forth. It was like, Hamas, Hamas, we love you.
Burn Tel Aviv to the ground.
It was more catchy than that, but it involved
they're
like
really
rockets.
good with rhyming poetry. That's what I think.
They're really good with rhyming poetry, and it was very much. It was kind of like again, to get to my social theory that this is a social phenomenon rather than a political phenomenon. Again, Andrew Heaton, consistently anti-teenager. Teenagers, I don't think you know who the hell Che Guevara is. I don't think you know. I think you bought a really quippy shirt that looks cool. Same thing where there's a like fist in the air fight. Yeah, Hamas. That's who we're in favor of. Rockets. Yeah, because it's fun and we get laid. So anyway, there's rhyming chants at Columbia and other places that are like level Tel Aviv or blow up Tel Aviv or Hamas, Hamas or Gaza, Gaza, make us proud.
Right. They've chanted, we'll have 1,000 October 7th. We'll have, it's like a lot of pro-violence things.
Like actual calls to violence.
Yeah. Exactly. Where it's not like Israel's gone too far, where I questioned Israel's intention. It's not that.
It's not like down with Bibi. It's down with Israel is what we're talking about. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like Israel's an illegitimate state. They should all leave Israel. They're all evil colonizers and rockets are justified. Violence is good. Right. That kind of stuff is what we're talking about.
Go back to Poland at students who were born in New York and
right, exactly.
Family died in Poland.
We swap in the word we swap in the word Zionist with Jew, and we're like, oh yes, now the equation's even clearer than I previously thought. This does appear to be blatant anti-Semitism. That is what we're talking about. Cap, can you elaborate on any of that? Just because I for anybody not following this, I know you are following the various episodes that are going on.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is exactly right. It's like this idea, and it's also the idea I think I mentioned last time, where it's like, yeah, you have all the time you want to protest Israel, but it's like I think people like right after October 7th and there's still 133 hostages. Nobody cares. Nobody's saying a word. Like that's the other thing that really bothers Jews. Like nobody's saying a word about them. Yeah, and the women who are held hostages are probably, if they're alive, are still sex slaves. That's the reason they're alive. And it's like nobody cares. It's like we forgot. Everyone just forgot that happened. Like there's children. There's a bit, and Hamas. They released a video yesterday of a hostage who is still alive, and he's an American citizen, so it's probably why he's still alive. And he's in this video, he's missing his arm. He lost his arm. He's a 23-year-old guy. And it's like, it's just this idea that these kids could care less. And it's almost like they're not, you said earlier, 2-state, 3-state solution. None of them, they don't, I know they're all stupid. Most of them do not, their leaders know, they don't know anything about the history, but they don't want a 2-state solution. They want magically 7 million Israeli Jews now to just either, I don't think they really want them to die, most of them, but to just disappear, to leave,
Where are they gonna
to go somewhere, to like magically
Wait, can
leave.
I tell you the Heaton solution? But you know what? Solution's a bad word to use in this context. The Heaton policy to try to alleviate violence in the Middle East. This
hope
was my
this is about zoning.
change the final solution to the Hitler policy to alleviate violence. And he had an idea.
Okay, we're gonna take like half of Wyoming, approximately the size of Israel, and we're gonna take Baja California. We're gonna talk to the Mexicans; they'll be fine. They'll love this. And we're gonna go. Okay, Palestinians, you get Baja California. Israelis, you get Wyoming, and just no one gets to go to Israel for the next 20 years, other than to visit. But no one gets to live there.
Timeout.
We're gonna all have a timeout. We're gonna all have a timeout. And then if you want to move back, when we work out the stuff, you can move back. But until then, it's just a tourist destination. We're not going to have anything going on.
Can we put bar
Sounds like the
mitzvahs?
demilitarized zone, which has its problems, but has turned out to be a wonderful place for wildlife to flourish.
You know what?
Because no one's there. So it
Heaton,
really could be
big
quite good
environmentalist.
ecologically as well.
Anti-teenager, pro-wolf. That is my perspective.
I'll stand by that. So I want to underscore, I think, what Cap was saying. And I have here, I walked around the NYU campus. I know we can't, we're doing audio, but I walked around the NYU campus last night to see what was going on. And the area where the protests were taking place had been completely boarded up and blocked. And there were big spray paint signs that said "Wall of Shame." And I believe it was the students protesting the wall going up to prevent further protests. And there were signs everywhere. And I just want to read what's on some of the words on these
they're building
signs,
a wall,
because I think
and
it really
NYU?
underscores.
They're building.
There's like a wooden wall that basically there's a construction site, and it kind of looks like they just continued the construction, but it completely
Build that
blocks
wall.
the square around the business school, which is where these protests and encampments and everything were taking place. So, but the sign, I think, completely underscores Kaplan's point, which is that no one seems to care about what's going to happen to the Israelis, the hostages, the fact that this was started with a terrorist. So it says, call to action. This is support our Palestinian brothers and sisters, resist racist NYPD intimidation. I'm sure most of these people in the protests are white. I don't know for sure, but they're resisting racist NYPD intimidation. And the call is to go up to Columbia last night and join the protest. Columbia students are protesting for university divestment from colonial Israel. The deadline for negotiations, the Columbia students who we need to support have been threatened with riot cops and the National Guard. Protect our right to organize. So, Heaton, I would like to hear your legal take on their right to organize. And then it says in very, very big letters, conceal your identity, be ready for a fight. And to me, that just screams sporting event, like Cap said, and young people.
And that's why they wear the COVID masks, right?
do.
Because they say conceal your
And
identity.
they're all wearing COVID masks or scarves or whatever else.
So, two responses to that. First, you don't have a right to organize on a private university campus. That, like, I'm sorry, free speech and organization is like, I can't like go into your home and start shouting stuff. And when you go, "This is my home, get out of my home," go, "But I'm passionate about a thing that rings true." Like that's not how it works. So I don't know. Is NYU public or is it private? I don't know.
Private.
It's private. Yeah, same thing.
Yep.
So like University of Oklahoma, Harvard of Oklahoma, that I graduated from, is a public university, and so it is open to the public. The University of Oklahoma belongs to the people of Oklahoma, not to the students, but to the people of Oklahoma. The students are admitted to take classes, and you can't just sit in a class as a regular person. But if you're a member of the public, which is anybody in Oklahoma, you can go to the library and you can use those library facilities because they're a public facility. If you want to pass out pamphlets or you want to engage in protest, that is a constitutionally protected right for you, taking place on a public land, very similar to if you were doing it in a park or at the state capitol or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. The right to organize does not exist in the same way for random people on a private university campus. But the bit that I find more odious is that wear a mask and prepare to fight. Yeah. In addition to being anti-teenager, I am very, very anti-black bloc. So like being careful with my words here. I think most people would call it Antifa, but Antifa immediately if you use that term. So, but Antifa is not an organization. Antifa is just, yep, I agree with all that. That's why I'm saying black bloc of people like dressing up in ninja pajamas and breaking windows with bricks. That's
like
the thing.
Did in the
I'm
90s, the
to.
world trade, like the anti-world trade protest that seems so crazy to me in Seattle. Now it's like every college campus is doing it.
Right. And my solution to that is there seems to be a very big push from these folks on collective justice and thinking of groups in terms of identity. And so just whenever any property problems happen or any violence happens, arrest everybody as a block and meter out prison sentences based on privilege. I think that would take care of that real quick. So if you're a 22-year-old upper middle class white affluent person, don't worry, you're going to get a longer prison sentence than anybody that's a part of this phenomenon that's black and underprivileged that happens to be from outside the university. Like I think that you would see that all decline very, very rapidly. But I have no time for that kind of nonsense. The idea that we're going to there's a difference between a riot and a protest. Protests are constitutionally protected. They can be very good. There are multiple actors in them. There are probably going to be bigots. There are going to be people with legitimate perspectives, on and so forth. Riots are different. Riots are where you're breaking shit. And generally, it's pretty indiscriminate. It's generally just because it feels good to break a lamp or break a window. I have no time for any of that stuff. And
that's good.
I'm not really clear how breaking windows on a campus or I don't know, punching a police horse or whatever is going to result in your preferred Middle Eastern policy.
I mean, and I think this goes back to the actual purported claim of the protest, which is let's divest. Hey, university, divest from
which
Israel.
They just mean is like ETFs, like the university's endowment is in stock ETFs that might have some Israeli companies in it. There's nothing. The university's not investing in like an Israeli company.
It's an index fund. It's like the Fortune 500.
Like, there's nothing you can do. I mean, I know you could not have any study abroad. You cannot admit Israeli students. Like, I don't know what they're really, how they vet.
I mean, NYU has a Tel Aviv site.
Right. You could just get rid of the campus. Is that what are they asking for that? I don't know.
But even then they're too like, I have a lot of problems with American foreign policy. I would agree with many of the foreign critiques of American foreign policy, but if theoretically Germany wanted to cut ties with the University of Oklahoma's study abroad program, I'd be like, I honestly, I don't feel like this is the way to do it. If anything, you are going to further your goals by maintaining dialogue and relationships with the country you have a problem with, many of whom might be more sympathetic to you in that particular place. Like, I know Israeli politics is very complex and there's lots of opinions in Israel, but like, if you're at a University of Columbia, my guess is you're going to find opinions most similar to yours at the University of Tel Aviv. You're going to find that those opinions are more similar to yours than like, I don't know, the Chamber of Commerce of Tel Aviv. Yeah. Or the University of Tehran, for that matter.
Well, yeah. And I mean, they just literally, and I bring up Iran because tragically they just sentenced to death like yesterday, this Iranian rapper who was supporting the movement last year when the women were taking off their hijab. And none of those kids on college campuses care about this at all. And yeah, in Tel Aviv University, I'm sure there's a pride event and there's all sorts of, it's a very liberal place, but they call that pink washing. So I shouldn't even go down that. I shouldn't even make that argument.
So I got a final question about campus stuff, and then I want to just throw some random, please speak for all Jews and or Israelis questions at Cap.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I'll also answer those questions.
Thanks. That would be great. I would really appreciate that.
It'll be the
however, I will kick off this question to Andrea. I've seen lots of articles comparing the weathermen from the 1970s to the things going on in Columbia of taking over a campus, not just protesting, but taking over a campus and doing sit-ins or like capturing the president or whatever. Is there some ideological root on college campuses that the institution itself is illegitimate or evil, and therefore every few years there's an attempt to burn it down? Is this some kind of rite of passage for college students where, we capture the college president and get our feelings out, but in reality, what we're really doing is realizing that the system is corrupt and that there's systemic racism and whatnot, and eventually we will graduate and become professors and we will look on with joy as the college students do this. Like, is this a cyclical thing? Is it something endemic to universities, or is it something that's changed?
It's a good question, and it's A great observation. And I think there is some truth to it in the sense that part of college from a very idealistic perspective, and this is something that was drummed into me as a college student and has been drummed into me as someone who is part of the pyramid scheme of college and has been teaching college students for a very long time, which is college is about teaching you to be an independent thinker and to stand up for what you believe in and to have critical reasoning and arguments and this and that. And I think that kind of, liberal arts mantra of we are here to question what's been told to us and have an open mind and lead with reason and rationality and all that kind of stuff. I think that has been around forever. I don't know that I'm sure that we don't actually lead with reason and rationality for any of us, but we're told that it's kind of a place where you really open your eyes and see the world. And it's a special place to go where if you just went straight to work, you would never have this wonderful eye-opening ascend from the cave type of experience. That's kind of the currency of college. In addition to, you can put the word Columbia on your resume and you have instant invitations to a network of people who are going to invite you to happy hour, give you jobs and blah, blah, blah. So those are kind of like the two competing promises, like this like all-knowing light and then this kind of very utilitarian thing on your resume, right? But I also think that over the last 10 years or however many years, we've seen this conversation being underway in the United States about what is happening on college campuses. And historically, college campuses have been many college campuses are left-leaning. It's pretty much a given that your professors are going to be on the left. And when I was at the University of Michigan, we had one professor who was a Republican, and he was like the Republican. And we were all like, how is he sticking it out as a Republican? And he's in Michigan, which is a very Republican state, right? Ann Arbor, where I was not Republican, but it's expected. And I'm on the left. I'm used to being in environments where it's assumed that we all agree with each other. And when Black Lives Matter was stirring, Occupy Wall Street, even going back further, and then from 2020 on and the pandemic, colleges were just on the left and it was a given. And we had a lot of really interesting critiques of that coming from the right, some of them more extreme than I agreed with, but we need a free university and the left is brainwashing. And now we're just seeing it come to bear, which is we've let college students say, we are going to be as far left as you let us. And now the administrators are like, oop, too far, a little too far, but now we don't know what to do about it. So we've sort of set us up as be free thinkers, challenge authority, challenge what's told. You can change the world. And then students see one tiny way and someone thought of something, which is, oh, let's have Columbia divest. And now everyone is like, oh, this is how I'm going to be a free thinker and a radical, and I'm going to change the world without having to go through the trouble of final exams. So it's both been around forever and ever and is completely consistent with the promise of college, and I think has really taken off given TikTok, social media, performative justice, and the fact that the colleges have over the past, let's say, even 5 years, defaulted to the left is the perspective with which we see the world. When I teach data science, not political. I would show survey research, and I would have to say something like, "Oh, well, the racial categories and the gender categories are obviously narrow and not correct," because I know that I'm going to get complaints from students saying, well, actually race is a social construct. I'm like, I know, but we can also ask people in a survey. And like, I'm non-binary and I'm not going to get upset if I see a survey that divides people into men and women. Like, I'm not. Yeah. But you have to cater to that. And so I can't say this is inevitable because I didn't see it coming, but it's not surprising at all that we are seeing this amount of kind of far left activism in a place that has been absolutely catering to that and promising that kind of free thinking since the very beginning.
This is a whole other can of worms, but I'll open it and then we'll move on to a different thing.
All right.
I think you're very right to point out that universities are two different phenomena that have been combined into the same thing. They are a very high-minded, teaching you how to think and actualizing yourself as an individual, and the knowledge is inherently good. That is one part of universities. And the other part of universities is vocational training, like law school or med school or VOTech. They're all vocational schools. And the utility of networking and so on and so forth. I think it was a major mistake to combine those two. Like, historically speaking, I think liberal arts, we should have come up with a different name. We should have called them like some German word of like Akademiker Schink or something. I don't know, whatever the thing is. have that and have like, nope, law schools, like lump them all together. Like VOTech and law school, same category. Stuff where you actualize, different category. And the longer arc that I see is universities are one of the last remaining medieval institutions that still exist, and we changed them in the I guess, like 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, where they ceased to be theological seminaries, which was the point of most universities historically. Was they were very much the high-minded thing. They were not vocational at all. They were a place where you learned about God and you learned about theology and you became a better Christian, and very likely you used that as a stepping stone to go to seminary to become a priest. And we went, well, what if we take the same structure, but we apply an Enlightenment framework and rationalism to it? Great idea. Very much agree with that. I worry that the genetics of universities is a medieval seminary, and that there will always be a draw to turn it into, how do we identify right think and promulgate right think in the students that join our seminary? That's kind of what I worry about long term.
Well, and don't forget that universities primarily are trying to make money so that they can stay alive as well. I mean, it's very much a commodity and a product and a business, and no one wants to admit that.
Almost
except for the
like
people who do fundraising.
Almost like the church in the Middle Ages was sometimes concerned with money, despite being vested with the souls of the population. Souls
are expensive.
There's a guy I want to bring on the program that I read an eye-popping statistic from him. Like he makes the case that Harvard and Yale and so on and so forth they're really hedge funds that happen to teach classes. Yeah, that the amount of money that is, I mean, it's like we're talking about like hundreds of. We're talking about endowments that are larger than the incomes of some countries, and that they're like they have become behemoth financial institutions unto themselves.
They don't have to pay. What's the tax status of a university?
They get it was changed slightly under Trump, where there was a tax that was levied on hedge funds or something. It was like some percentage that did like kind of give a little bit of a black, not even a minor bruise. That was revoked when it came back to Biden. But yeah, I just had Batya Ungar-Sargon on the program, or I just interviewed her. The episode's not out yet, but her data is that we give $200 billion in federal and state grants to higher education. We give $1 billion to VOTEC, to kind of give you an idea of what the priorities are in the country. I'll leave that there. Put a pin in it. Cap, can I ask you a bunch of very uncomfortable, problematic questions about what's going on in Israel and Palestine?
Let's do it.
Great. Okay. So I am not following this super closely. It's just not something that I have a tremendous amount of expertise in. But I have many friends who are doing it, and they regularly bring up that there are 34,000 dead in Gaza, and obviously the terror strike on October 7th was horrific and bad, and the hostages are very bad. But they look at the amount of collateral damage that's going on in Gaza, and they look at the infrastructure being destroyed in Gaza, and they are concerned that it is not simply a retaliation and attempt to root out Hamas, but a concerted strategy to create a humanitarian crisis to drive out Palestine and just take the money and institute an Israeli one-state solution. It makes sense to me from a logical precept, and I can see why somebody would protest that. That seems like a legitimate thing to protest. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm just paraphrasing what other people tell me. What do you make of that
first
assertion?
Off, the 34,000 number is just a number that Hamas released. We don't actually know how many people have died. That's just the number the Gaza Ministry of Health. It probably, in the past, supposedly they haven't been that off. So maybe we'll just say it's 34,000. But of that number, I mean, Israel says 13,000 approximately are Hamas fighters. So that's 20. Now we're down to 21,000 people have died. I've seen people smarter than me make this case statistically, comparing it to Mosul and other, when we fought ISIS, America, and other for warfare in an enclosed space, to have 21,000 civilians and 13,000 fighters die is actually, my understanding, a pretty good ratio.
Got it.
Obviously, it's a tragedy. And I will say it's a tragedy. I feel terrible.
Kind of a going rate.
What's that? No.
As horrific as it is to say this, there's kind of a going rate for collateral damage.
Attack, they probably thought there'd be more, to be honest. Like, they knew they were basically killed, or they thought Israel wasn't going to respond. But if, in their heart of hearts, they probably knew, heart of hearts is the wrong word, but like they knew Israel was going to respond, and they knew a lot of people were going to die. Now, the reason why Israel had to level Gaza, unfortunately, is because of the tunnels. Like, the world's been sending billions of dollars to the Palestinians for a long time, and the Hamas took the money and built these they've built tunnels. I forget the numbers of how But the elaborate, like the Israeli intelligence had no idea. They knew they had tunnels. They didn't know how elaborate they were. So that's where Hamas fight. They hide in the tunnels while the people, they don't use them as bomb shelters. So Israel blew up as many as they could. They had to, I mean, they tried. I know somebody who, when she was in the Israeli military, her job was to literally call the buildings they're about to blow up and speak in Arabic and be like, get all the civilians out. So Israel tries their best, no matter who's in charge, because it's bad for them to have civilians die, no matter what you think about PR-wise. And now, as far as the second thing you said, the one-state solution. Now, Israel left Gaza in 2005 or 6, I believe. Like there have been Jews in the Gaza Strip. It's true for thousands of years. And then the British kicked them out at one point because they were trying to appease the Arabs. And then the Jews went back in 1967 and they built settlements there. That is true. But Ariel Sharon in 2005 removed all of the Israelis from Gaza Strip. They left. And there are some hard right people who have said things that, yes, if you take that, what they say, they're like, we should take over Gaza again. That's never going to happen. That is not Netanyahu's goal. It's frankly not even, there's no reason, yes, there were Jews there a long time, but there's no biblical reason. There's no reason why the Jews should be in Gaza Strip. It's never going to happen. I mean, so yeah, that is just taking things. There's a few lunatics in the Israeli government. It's a parliament. It's the most hard right. Unfortunately, this happened. It was never a good time for this to happen, but it happened when the most hard right government in Israeli history was there. And Netanyahu has to appease them, because if he doesn't appease them and they drop out of the coalition, then they go to elections, and he's probably going to lose because of the giant intelligence failure of October 7th. He'll probably lose the next election. He knows that. So anyway, so that's where that comes from. But there's not going to be a Gaza one-state solution. That's not going to happen.
Okay. I watched a Jon Stewart clip a couple of days ago, and Jon Stewart brought up that 2,000 acres had been appropriated in the West Bank, and the implication was, look, the West Bank's not even involved in this. Do you know anything about that? Because I saw that and was like, oh my God, land grab. But it sounds like you do not think that there's some sort of.
He's like, I was excited when he came back, and then I realized that he was going to be like a self-hating Jew. I was like, I'm out for. I haven't watched his clips lately, but look, the West Bank's more complicated because the West Bank Palestinian Authority is in charge, not Hamas. Palestinian Authority is theoretically the moderate side. But they haven't had an election in I don't even know how many, almost 20 years there either. They don't hold elections. Nice. They've got an 87-year-old guy who's a Holocaust denier in charge. He's the moderate. And yeah, they also pay money to every terrorist attack. The Palestinian Authority pays them pays the family $25,000. But anyway, I don't know. Yeah, there are settlements in the West Bank. I have family who lives in one of them actually. And that is part of when you say two-state solution, both sides are going. If there were a two-state solution, Israel, by anybody who understands these things, would have to uproot most of those settlements. Are going to be gone, and that's going to be the hard. Israel's going to have to do that to get a two-state solution. But in the meantime, I don't know. There are some settlements, when they say the word settlement, that are part of the West Bank, but are essentially like suburbs of Jerusalem. They're close. Some of them are far out. I don't know what he's speaking out specifically, but. Yeah, it's not a lot of people I know don't really support settlements in the West Bank because it seems
counterproductive. Okay, so from where you're looking at, Cap, you do not think that there is a 800-year looking into the future. Let's move the line by 3 inches every 5 years until we've got all of this region under Israeli control going on.
Well, look, so it happened. So people, I don't think, and this is something people don't understand. It's from 1948 to 1967. Jordan controlled the entire West Bank, and they controlled the city of Jerusalem. And then when there was the 6-Day War, Israel won. And they never made a Palestinian state, we should say, with that area. They didn't do anything. They left the Palestinians as refugees because that was good for them. And then when the 6-Day War happened, Israel won the West Bank back. And at that point, they had a decision to make what to do with it. And I think they probably chose the worst possible solution, which was we're not going to really figure anything out. We're just going to slowly, like you said, slowly build. So yes, there are people who believe in this greater Israel idea, which is, yes, that is where the Bible took place, the West Bank. That's Judean. They call it's Judea and Samaria. That is a more realistic thing there are more people in Israel who would love to just keep it, but it's just not, ultimately it's not realistic because there's millions of Arabs who live there, Palestinians, and you're a democracy. So if you just kept the whole thing and made it one state, you'd have to give them voting rights, and they have a lot of babies. They have babies at a faster clip than the secular. So then all the voters are either they're Palestinians and they're Orthodox Jews are the ones having babies. So that's not a good long term. Eventually, like, this is why, like, the idea of a 2-state solution seems insane to me right now, because you're making peace with people who support the rape and murder of your people, of your civilians. But, like, it's the only way. We have to get to one eventually. Like, it maybe, I don't know when it's going to happen. It has to happen at some point because of math.
Although it does kind of sound, Cap, just throwing this out here, like a 20-year cooling period where no one lives at all in Israel or Palestine, because they're having a great time in Wyoming, and Baja California is a great way to get there.
I was trying to, when you were bringing that up earlier, I was thinking who would consider, like, whenever there's a crazy trade in sports, or when someone proposes it, I always like to think, like, which team would who would at least consider this crazy trade? So I was thinking, like, who would consider this more likely? Because the analogy I was going to make earlier when we were talking about colleges is that the Palestinian side, to me, it makes sense that colleges like them because it's always been like the side of children. Like, at every turn, they were offered something. They've said, no, I want everything. Like, it's like when I negotiate with my 10-year-old daughter and she's crying and is mad, and I'm just like trying, like, in 1948, here's a state. No, we don't want it. 1990, there's been many times throughout history, Clinton's like, we had a deal. Israel's agreed. Arafat walks away. And now this new thing is like, we want river to the sea. Like, it's like very childish. Like, it's not real negotiating. So I don't know, in that line of thinking, where the let's go to Wyoming and cool off for 20 years would fit in. But I think that maybe some of the Israelis would consider it. It's beautiful. They love the mountains. They love to hike. I don't know.
Yeah. I think if we got the college students to protest for Heaton's policy, I would join those college students. That's my promise to you.
Yeah, thanks.
I will pitch a tent and I will be there.
We'll wrap up here in a second, because the second I started talking to Cap about Israel-Palestine, I was like, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is a bad idea.
No. Honestly, here's the thing.
I can't even ask informed decisions. All I can say is, my other friend said this.
I'm just like, well, it sounds bad.
See, you say you don't know what you're talking. These kids, like, you've seen these interviews where, like, they'll be like, what are you protesting? What river? What sea? Like, they don't even know. They say the word, they say colonization. And if I said to any of them, like, do you know, like, these Jews who colonized, they just bought land from an Arab who sold them land if they weren't from there originally. It's not really the same as colonization. It's more like immigration. They just bought a house. They moved there. They bought a house. Like, what would they say to that? Like, they don't have any concept. They just think, like, I think they just think, like, the Jews just rolled in right off the Holocaust with an army.
Right.
And just, like, took over with American help. Well, America wasn't giving Israel anything for 20 years.
I think one of the things that makes this an interesting intellectual fissure point in higher education right now is that higher education is increasingly doubled down on the very specific worldview that there are oppressors and victims, and that moral legitimacy comes through victimhood. There's not going to say names, but there's perhaps a reason why a popular American senator was very keen to initially assert her Native American credentials in order to have some more legitimacy in that category. And
Bernie Sanders.
It's Bernie Sanders. Exactly.
No, and can I say one thing there that this really applies to is that Israel in its beginning was the David, right? Like, everybody loved it. It was just like, and like Bernie Sanders lived in a kibbutz at some point in his life. He's Jewish.
Oh, he did? I didn't know that.
I have a cousin, I won't say his name, or I have a relative who
Bernie Sanders
is like a communist. Yeah. And I know he met the mother of his children on a kibbutz, I believe, in Israel. And now his Facebook feed is all like pro-Iran, pro-Russia, hate Israel stuff. And it's just like Israel became, in 1967 was the moment when they won that war and actually took land they had never had before. They actually conquered land. They became the Goliath, sorry. And ever since then, and as Israel's army's gotten better, Israel said, we can't mess around anymore. We got to be ready. And it became this great military state for the size of the country. And that's, unfortunately, nobody wants to be on the side of Goliath.
People would hate Ireland if it were 10 times bigger. Ireland's great, but if it were 10 times, if Ireland were the size of Germany,
military, if Ireland got a better military than, like, say, the UK or something, and it took Northern Ireland back or something, they would hate them.
But it is this interesting fissure point of, like, there's that broader framework of oppressor victim. There's the guy stepping on the guy, and you want to be the guy getting stepped on because that's where more legitimacy comes from. And then there are kind of subsets within that of like schools that are dependent, or schools of thought dependent on that, and like colonization is a really big one in them. And so it's like this entire phenomenon has to be interpreted through who's the little guy being stepped on, and it's like I think that is a good epistemological filter to look at some things through, but it's not a universal. Like there's no universal epistemological filter. Yeah. I tend to look at things in terms of coercion and freedom. And generally, like my question is like, well, did anybody make him do it? Well, that's fine. But that's not universally applicable. There are situations. The civil rights movement's a pretty good one of big guy stepping on a little guy. And like, but this one, I think part of why you're seeing this intellectual civil war playing out within blue circles in higher education is because everybody participating in it is a part of that oppressor victim colonization worldview, and it's now sort of concentrated within blue team rather than being a broad spectral phenomenon.
And I think that,
well, and even the language of that sign of, let's fight with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. It's like, okay, like I support, I hear you about the ratio of deaths, but like I would prefer the Palestinians not be killed. But I don't know that they're your Palestinian brothers and sisters. You're white people at a very expensive school, and but because you can align with them, you get to be the oppressed as well. And there's all kinds of posters and signs that say like, we are also Palestinian liberation frees us all. And it's like, you're just adopting the position because Heaton, as you said, being the victim is the strong point in this worldview.
And it's complicated because like I mentioned the Israeli government, which it's totally right to a lot of people in Israel are protesting. They've 100,000 people were in the streets last year over this judicial reform thing. Every week, there's people protesting about the hostages, the way they're dealing with it, the war. But those right-wing members of the government, if you look at their backgrounds, they're all like Iraqi Jews, Tunisian Jews. They're all Arabs. They're all people who were literally oppressed. Like when Saddam Hussein came to power in Iraq, the first thing he did was hang a bunch of Jews in the streets to unite the people. And then the Jews were all so these people were all thrown out of their lands. They were much more people of color / oppressed people. They have terrible politics. So like, that's why it gets so complicated. Like 50% of Israelis are of Arab descent, like is Arab Jewish descent. Like, it's like, and they don't understand any of that. They just think like, oh, it's a bunch of like rich white people over there. They hate America. I think we didn't get into it. I know we're out of time, but I think there's a lot of it's like a hatred of America, death to America. You get said a lot, which doesn't.
I think, Cap, there should absolutely be an economic school of thought called I Hate You, Dad. Yeah. And I feel like I Hate You, Dad economics is at the forefront of American universities. I hate you, Dad economics is very common in American universities. Yes. There definitely is that kind of
to put a cherry on the top of the I hate you, Dad economics cake. I'm looking. I got some emails on my NYU account, and apparently there was a bomb threat to NYU last night, and it was tied to something to do with the Middle East, and apparently it happened at other campuses as well. So if you really hate your dad, you send in a hoax bomb threat.
That's when and I know nobody on my side is ever. We don't chant death to America, and we never send in bomb threats.
You could consider it, Cap. That might get a lot of people on your side.
Yeah, no, that's been a while. But and I like how you get what kind of security is this? You still get the emails? You're bringing this up?
I'm technically a visiting scholar, so I have building access and email accounts.
That's good.
So if anyone wants any to be snuck into the library, let me know.
Next time Cap and I want to go to the NYU library, we don't have to wear a horse costume anymore like we usually do. We could just come in with you and you'll use the card to get us in. Nice. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Well, I know Andrea's got a heart out and Cap and I need to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here.
Enough for your questions.
You have. I'm slightly more knowledgeable, and I need to just do a lot more independent research on that whole phenomenon. I feel far more comfortable identifying the social phenomenon of I hate you, Dad economics at university campuses and talking about medieval theology and whatnot than I do about foreign policy involving the Middle East. Cap, where can people find you?
You could find me at Cap in America and on all social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and Cap in NYC. If you're looking to buy some real estate in New York, that's my other side hustle, or my main hustle. I'll hook you up with that.
Well, and you are the host of Lost in America, along with your absent sidekick, Turner Sparks.
We've been on a bit of a hiatus, so your listeners might have noticed, but we might be back soon. We are, but if you do want to hear what Turner and I are up to, patreon.com/Lost in America, you can pay, but it's very further... for a lot of comedy, though. There's been a lot of good stuff lately. So check us out. 1 month.
Nice.
Give us 1 month.
Andrea, how about you? Where can people find you?
You can find me on all the things at Jones-Rooy, JONESROOY, and I am in the middle of launching videos from my Data Science for Everyone course. It was at NYU, but I think everyone should be everyone. And so if you want to learn some data science, you can go to datascienceneedsyou.com for videos and a textbook. It's all free.
I will 100% check that out. And for anybody that is listening on Andrea or Kaplan circles, I am Andrew Heaton. I am the headmaster of the Political Orphanage, where you can find all manner of content on that particular podcast.
Headmaster.
Nice to see you both.
Good
Nice
to see you
too.
both. Bring them home now.
See you in the tents.
And see you in the
See you in the tents.
Bring them home now. Get lost.
Hey, quick announcement for you, gang. I will be in Washington, D.C. at the end of May. Myself, Justin Robert Young, and Jen Briney are all doing a live show for our podcast, We're Not Wrong, together on Friday, May 24th at the Anacostia Arts Center. You can get tickets on Eventbrite. You could probably just search for We're Not Wrong Live DC show, but I have also posted a link to said event in today's episode description. Now, we sold about half of those tickets on day one of sales. Literally, somebody reached out to me to tell me how happy they were that they got tickets to the sale and that the timing allowed for him to do heart surgery and have 2 weeks of convalescence before attending the event. Very dedicated listener right there to consider heart surgery in the overall scheduling mechanisms that he's looking at. Point is, if you want to see a live show with Jen, me, and Justin, and presumably we'll hang out beforehand or afterwards, I would advise you not to sleep on the tickets. Like, if you want to go, don't wait till the last minute. I highly suspect that they will sell out soon. So hit up that link, and hopefully I will see you in Washington, D.C. Next announcement. This week's bonus episode, available exclusively for patrons, is with State Senator Eric Brakey, who is also the head of the New Hampshire Free State Project, which is a concerted attempt to convince enough libertarians to move to the Granite State to make it a libertarian haven, if not a libertarian voting bloc. You heard from Eric partially a few months back when I was up in New Hampshire, although he wasn't the main person I was speaking to. I am going to talk to him about what the Free State Project is up to, but also, is it a good idea? I'm divided on it. On the one hand, I really like the idea of voting with your feet and forming communities of like-minded people. That has broad appeal to me. I am very much a federationalist in how I look at polities forming. On the other hand, in the current American context, I am worried that if everybody starts to do this and Democrats in the state of Texas flee to more ideologically simpatico blue states, and meanwhile all those harrowed Republicans in the People's Republic of California flee to the red states, that we're not going to end up creating more variance within our increasingly one-size-fits-all federation. We're just going to create more monolithic blocks fighting over who gets to run it and exacerbate political tension. I am somewhat divided on this. I would like to speak to somebody who is living out that voting with their feet kind of thing. Eric's always a fun chat. He's a friend of mine. Should make for an interesting conversation, and we might even wander into the topic of #national divorce. That is on this week's bonus episode, which you can find by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. That's patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. Thanks. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy and Michael Ira Kaplan, for coming on. Thank you, Eric Stipe, who edited today's video. And thank you, patrons who make it all possible. Until next time, I have been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.